Hi everyone, my name is Michaela Kaiser. I'm a YSU student. I'm studying dietetics, and today I'm going to be talking to you about sustainable, resilient, and healthy food and water systems and the framework and action steps for registered dietitian nutritionists. So first let's talk about sustainability. Sustainability is defined as the ability of a system to be maintained over the long term and meet the needs of the present without jeopardizing the ability to meet the needs of future generations. Resilience, when applied to food and water systems, is a measure of the system's ability to survive and persist within variable or volatile environments. So by 2050, the world population is projected to exceed 9 billion. This stresses the capacity of global resources that are needed to supply an increasing demand for both safe and healthy food and water sources. There are only so many resources that are available to meet the growing needs of the global population, so how do we expand agricultural land without depleting limited natural resources such as soil, water, and fossil fuels? The challenge of finding and creating sustainable, resilient, and healthy food systems has created a unique opportunity for a registered dietitian nutritionist to step into a role that promotes access to safe food and water for all, as they are the nation's largest group of food and nutrition professionals. The Hunger and Environmental Nutrition Dietetic Practice Group of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics has developed a standards of professional performance for registered dietitian nutritionists working in sustainable, resilient, and healthy food and water systems. Next, let's talk about the foundation of sustainable, resilient, and healthy food and water systems. If you look on the right, you'll see an image with 4 different bubbles that represent the 4 different foundations of these food and water systems. So first and foremost, there's the nutrition and health aspect of the foundations of these food and water systems, and this assures dietary diversity through safe and secure food and water supplies. And then we have social, cultural, and ethical capital, which promotes cultural diversity while empowering social responsibility and community engagement. It also advances ethical, humane, and fair treatment of individuals and animals. Then we have environmental stewardship, and this conserves, protects, and renews natural resources such as soil, water, air, energy, and biodiversity. It also supports vibrant ecosystems. It promotes a low carbon footprint and mitigates climate change. Lastly, we have economic vitality, which is the blue bubble, and this builds community wealth and is economically viable. So next I have a list of some different terms that I believe are important for dietitians to know that are working in this field. When I was researching, I came across all of these different topics and terms that I wasn't necessarily fully familiar with. So I thought it was important to incorporate these into this presentation because of their importance and the fact that we need to know what they mean. So first of all, we have carbon footprint, and this is the total amount of greenhouse gases that are emitted into the atmosphere each year by a person, family, building, organization, or company. So a person's carbon footprint includes greenhouse gas emissions from fuel that an individual burns directly, such as by heating a home or riding in a car, really simple things that we might not even think about maybe causing greenhouse gas emissions. It also includes greenhouse gases that come from producing the goods or services that the individual uses, including emissions from food production systems, power plants that make electricity, factories that make products, and landfills where trash is sent. So there are a lot of different factors that may contribute to a carbon footprint. The next term that we have is a community-based food system. And this is a food system in which everyone has financial and physical access to culturally appropriate, affordable, nutritious food that was grown and transported without degrading the natural environment in which the general population understands nutrition and the food system in general. So this is the goal. We want people to be a part of a community-based food system, and we want them to understand what this means. Now let's talk about the Farm Bill, and this is a big one because there's a lot of information, and it's very important that we know what it is and what it does. So the Farm Bill is a comprehensive piece of legislation that covers most federal government policies related to agriculture in the United States. It's typically renewed every 5 years, and the provisions of the Farm Bill are divided into titles. And these are just overarching categories related to food and farming in the United States. So let's talk about the 2008 Farm Bill, which had 15 different titles, and these titles were commodity programs, conservation, trade, nutrition, credit, United States rural development, research, forestry, energy, horticulture, livestock, crop insurance and disaster assistance, commodity futures, trade and tax provisions, and miscellaneous. So it covered a wide variety of topics. New titles can be added to the Farm Bill during the reauthorization process. So for example, the energy title was created in 2002, and over 60% of the Farm Bill is allocated to nutrition programs, including the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, the Commodity Supplemental Food Program, purchase of fresh fruits and vegetables for distribution, Fresh Fruit and Vegetable Program, Healthy Food Education and School Gardening Pilot Programs, Farmers Market Nutrition Programs, and so many more. Food access is the next term that we should be familiar with. And this is a food security concept that includes availability or adequacy of supply of healthy food, accessibility or the location of the food supply, and the distance to that location. This can refer to a community level or within a household. Affordability refers to food prices and people's perception of worth relative to the cost. Acceptability of people's attitudes about attributes of their local food environment and degree that local food meets certain personally held standards. And also accommodation or how well local food sources accept and adapt to local residents' needs, such as store hours and types of payments that are accepted. So let's talk about food and water security. This is something that we want for everyone living in a community, and we want them to have access to food and water. Global food and water security requires a comprehensive approach to address the underlying causes of hunger, undernutrition, and inaccessibility to potable water, an investment in country-led initiatives and policies, strong strategic coordination that leverage the benefits of multinational institutions, and sustained and accountable commitments that secure healthful and safe food and water supply chains. National food and water security ensures the survival of the country through the use of agricultural, economic, energy, and environmental intelligence. This includes policies, systems, and environments that value and secure national biodiversity, ecosystem preservation, agricultural sustainability, and also biosecurity. Community food and water security is a state in which all community residents obtain a safe, culturally appropriate, nutritionally sound diet and clean water through an economically and environmentally sustainable food and water system that promotes community self-reliance and social justice. Household food and water security ensures access by all members at all times to enough food and potable water for an active, healthy life. This includes the readily available of nutritionally adequate and safe foods, ability to acquire acceptable foods in socially acceptable ways, and regular access to a safe and clean water supply. Now let's switch from learning about terms to learning about the different levels of dietetics practice. So first we have a competent practitioner, and in dietetics, this practitioner is an RDN who is either just starting their professional practice after having obtained their RDN registration and taking their exam and passing it, and they are registered by the Commission on Dietetic Registration, or a competent practitioner can also be an experienced RDN who has recently assumed responsibility to provide nutrition services in a new focus area. So they're doing something different than what they did before. So for example, a dietitian may have been working in a hospital clinically, and then they decide to change and start working in food service. So they would be considered a competent practitioner since they're new in that focus area. So now we have a proficient practitioner, and this is an RDN who generally has more than 3 years of practice experience. They have obtained operational job performance skills, and they are successful in their chosen focus area of practice. And lastly, we have an expert practitioner, and this is where we all hope to be at some point. An expert practitioner is an RDN who is recognized within the profession and has mastered the highest degree of skill in or knowledge of a certain focus or generalized area of dietetics through additional knowledge, experience, or training. An expert practitioner exhibits a set of characteristics that include leadership and vision and demonstrates effectiveness in planning, achieving, evaluating, and communicating targeted outcomes. Previously, I had mentioned that the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics had created a standards of professional performance for RDNs who are working in sustainable, resilient, and healthy food and water systems. And so now we're just going to go over them. An RDN can use the Academy standards of professional performance in order to identify the competencies needed to provide SRH food and water system services as a part of nutrition and dietetics practice. They can also use it to self-assess whether current knowledge base and skills are appropriate to provide safe and effective SRH food and water systems related nutrition and dietetic services for levels of practice. They can also identify the areas in which additional knowledge and skills are needed to practice at the competent, proficient, or expert level of SRH food and water systems related to nutrition and dietetics practice. They can provide a foundation for public and professional accountability in SRH food and water systems related to nutrition and dietetics practice, and they can also support efforts for strategic planning and or assist management in the planning of SRH food and water systems. Continuing on with the Academy Standards of Professional Performance for RDNs who are working in the SRH food and water systems. They can also enhance professional identity and communicate the nature of SRH food and water systems. They can also guide the development of SRH food and water systems related to nutrition and dietetics client counseling, continuing education programs, job descriptions, and career pathways. They can assist educators and preceptors in teaching students and interns the knowledge, skills, and competencies needed to promote SRH food and water systems, related principles throughout all areas of practice, and they can also position and prepare RDNs to create a new practice area and unique niche within SRH food and water systems. So as an RDN, how can we apply these standards to practice? Well, it depends what kind of RDN you are, whether you're competent, proficient, or an expert. So if you are considered a competent RDN, you might experience a little bit of a learning curve when you're becoming familiar with the body of knowledge and available resources to support the sustainable, resilient, and healthy food and water systems related to dietetics practice. But if you are considered a proficient RDN, you might be better equipped to apply evidence-based SRH food and water systems guidelines, and you also might be able to modify the SRH food and water systems according to unique practice situations, such as tailoring their intervention to the food and water systems and their geographic area, environmental conditions, or just based off their client's readiness to change. So at this point, if you are an expert RDN, you will probably demonstrate a more intuitive understanding of how issues of food and water systems, sustainability, and resilience can be integrated into nutrition and dietetics practice. They have also developed a high level of knowledge related to sustainability and have developed an extensive network of colleagues and resources to implement food and water systems, sustainability, and resilience. While an RDN may not have the specific content expertise of other food and water system colleagues such as economists, environmental scientists, or public policy analysts, an expert-level RDN in food and water systems would be an excellent addition to a multidisciplinary team. Now this is the fun part where we get to talk about the nutrition focused framework for action. So this is where we take what we just learned and apply it to real life nutrition scenarios. So the food and water systems include the resources, people, and activities involved in the production, processing, packaging, distribution, purchasing, preparation, consumption, discard, and safety of food and water. So there's a lot going on in this framework for action. The framework was developed during a meeting of experts in November of 2018. It was held by the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics Foundation as part of the Future of Food initiative, and the meeting lasted for 2 days. So participants included nutrition practitioners and external stakeholders representing expertise in clinical nutrition, food service, community nutrition, agriculture, food supply chains, environmental science, economics, racial equity, and food policy. So there was a wide array of different collaborators at this meeting. The framework for action identifies 5 entry points through which RDNs can organize sustainable food systems in both private practice as well as multi-sectoral collaborations. This work requires coordination between education, training, research, practice, and policy. Here is a visual of the framework for action for RDNs who are in the sustainable food and water systems field. It highlights the 5 entry points that leverage the strengths of the profession throughout the food systems. Effectively engaging in these entry points requires coordination of efforts across education and training, research, practice, and policy. The 5 entry points are shape and deliver dietary guidance, improve food and nutrition security and water security, align food production and nutrition, optimize supply chains and food environments, and reduce waste. This slide shows examples of possible collaborators for each entry point, and some collaborators that are common among multiple entry points. This is not an exhaustive list of all possible collaborators, and the collaborators are not exclusive to each entry point. For example, government agencies and policymakers are a common collaborator in the Shape and Deliver Dietary Guidance section, along with the food production and nutrition, and also improve food and nutrition security and water security. Here are some illustrative examples for each entry point. Each of the 5 entry points has implications for the development of new opportunities in education and training, research, practice, and policy. For example, if you look at the first row, which is education and training, and under the column titled Shape and Deliver Dietary Guidance, You will see different ways that these principles can be applied. One of the options is creating strategies for critically interpreting and translating evidence when providing sustainability-related dietary guidance to individuals, groups, and populations. In the next row, titled Research, under the third column, titled Align Food Production and Nutrition, research questions relevant to the entry point are listed, such as, how are food production practices, for example, those related to soil health or marine environments, related to nutrition status of crops and people? How does climate change affect nutritional status of crops and people and human health? How do food production practices, supply chain practices, and dietary patterns affect climate change? These are all great questions to ask yourself when you're working in the research department of sustainability. On this slide, there are more illustrative examples. When looking at the practice row in the reduce waste column, which is the very last column, some examples of skills and actions are given, such as identify ways to prevent waste of food, such as room delivery service meal options that improve patients' oral intake and decrease discards, support efforts to rescue food that hasn't reached the end of its life, use technologies for waste tracking, waste reduction, and food reuse. So looking at the policy row, which is the second row underneath practice, under the improve food and nutrition security and water security, which is the second column, examples of policy issues are given that are relevant to this entry point, such as policies that affect structural factors such as poverty, which can include race, gender wage gap, and build environments, such as funding for public transportation. Also, municipal policies that affect access to food and water, such as healthy retail incentives in urban areas, federal nutrition assistance programs such as WIC, SNAP, and the National School Lunch Program. And these are just a few examples of how to make practical applications by using the 5 different entry points. We have now reached the end of this presentation. I hope that you have learned something valuable about the sustainable, resilient, and healthy food and water systems, and also the framework and action steps for RDNs. I personally learned a lot myself on how to implement the different action steps. I had never known that this topic was something that was a part of the dietetics field, and now that I do, I know that there are opportunities here that I could maybe look at in the future. Here are my references, and thanks for watching.